Well, good evening, friends. We're all united and drawn here this evening for the common desire to study and deepen in yoga practice. And this is the final session in our December series titled The Sacred Heart Space. So we'll look at this region and its mythic and energetic and spiritual significance in greater depth and detail. The first session was dedicated to looking at the anatomy or esoteric anatomy of the heart. And we made a distinction between Anahata Chakra, the fourth chakra, resides approximately here, and another key landmark or feature or anatomy of the cave of the heart, which is, the way it's described and the living reality of its presence are probably two notably different things. So we, in terms of directions, we say, oh, it's one finger width to the left of your breastbone, slightly towards the lower end of the sternum. There. So we may look there, in fact, right now, and I don't see it necessarily, right? And it requires some prolonged looking. Oh, that's what meditative practice is, right? Like an extended looking in ways that your eyes and mind may not be accustomed to perceiving. But the ancients, that's how they described it, one finger width off to the left. And then there's the kind of awakened reality of recognizing this region. And we use different words to describe what lives or resides there. In the most basic sense, we call that the soul, or in Sanskrit, we call that Atman, or it's in Vedanta, they call it the self, right? And I find some consolation in that there is an ascribed location, some way to orient, some way to relate, some way to feel. I mean, clearly we all know that there's some unique intelligence to this region, when we're in awe or we're touched by something, our hands naturally come here, or people describe like, my heart is broken, or, this sense of unbounded love, and they point to this region. So there's, as we discussed again in the first session, some unique intelligence that resides here. And what's the deepest potential of that intelligence is this cave of the heart, is what it's classically called. So an overview, anatomical description. And then the second installment was to look at the roadmap to deeper recognition of the sacred heart space. And there's 2 or 3 kind of layers to that process. I'll name the full map. First is to work with the navel center, navel plexus. And this is this is the tantric model for how to do this. Very esoteric yoga system. And in that model, they cultivate what's called Agni, or fire. The fire element is seated in the navel plexus. And then to stoke or build a fire that's bright enough to subsume the dross or the content of the lower 3 chakras. And build a fire here, and then do things like Ashwini Mudra to offer it into that light, or do inversions, and then the flame goes up like that. There's various, you can enjoin this with like kind of meditative practice, and flame goes up and dissolves all negative tendencies that live there. And lo and behold, you feel more free, right? So that's step 1, building the fire of transformation within. And step 2, then, this is more of what we honed in on last week, was the purification of the mindscape. In fact, this is Patanjali's very definition of what yoga is. Yoga is the cessation of mental modification. So he also alludes to the cave of the heart as well in Sutra 136. He talks about Jyotirsh, and the Sanskrit's escaping me, but a light beyond all sorrow that lives in this region. So the second step is to build our powers of both purification of the mental practice, so weeding out impulsive desires that don't serve our higher well-being, as well as developing insight and discernment and refinement and a deeper perspective. And once we have, or let me say one more thing about that. So the Sundalahari, it's another tantric text, describes two swans. And these two swans are coasting along like this, just kind of in the graceful way that swans do, coasting through the water. And at some point, they turn towards one another and they held in one another's embrace and gaze. They see that they're not two swans, but they're actually one swan. And the same is true for our mindscape, that there isn't a lower mind and a higher mind. It's all part of one mindscape, if you will. When I was a child in the 70s, they had, maybe some of you are a witness to this as well, they had these cartoons like Looney Tunes, right? And on the one shoulder of the guy was the angelic figure, in a white robe and a halo and a harp, and was like giving him all the good counsel and so forth. And then on the other figure, there was a chap with a pitchfork, and he was all steamy hot and was telling the character to do all these nefarious things. And they would kind of like battle, the character would feel kind of conflicted. Do I mean here? Do I mean there? Which one of these voices do I listen to? And in this teaching of the swans, they're both part of the same mind. The mind that tells you, oh, I think you should have a second piece of chocolate cake, is the same mind that says, I wouldn't have done that if I were you. That kind of duality of the mind space. So developing a clearer and more singular vision is part of this phase too. And then to kind of direct that vision into the Sacred Heart or Cave of the Heart, and be a witness to this kind of spirit soul that I described earlier, that's beyond all sense of duality or separation or good, like this heavy weight of good and bad, or gain and loss, ego identification. Some more spiritually satiated identity. So that's our journey this evening. We'll work, of course, with the whole body, but our final meditation practice will culminate in kind of abiding appreciation for the heart center. Okay. So to do that, I'd actually like to start standing.